Hi, my name is John Poland. I'm Senior Director of Global Partnerships for Brivo. I am the business lead for our API partners. The purpose of this video is to give a basic demonstration for new partners on key parts of the API as it relates to our application. Julian?
Hi, I'm Julian Fine. I am our Senior API and Integration Support Specialist here at Brivo. My job is to help our developers who develop against our open API to follow best practices for security and API consumption when building their integrations.
Great. Thanks, Julian. So everyone, I'm going to start by logging in to the application. This is our fourth generation security system. It's called Brivo Access. And as you can see here, I'm going to use my profile to log in. And choose the Brivo account I want to work with. And with that, I will turn it over to Julian to discuss the different methods of authentication. Julian, take it away.
Thanks so much, John. So when authenticating through the Brivo API, you will be authenticating on behalf of an administrator on the account, much like John did when he was logging in through our UI. We have a few different methods of authentication, but for certified integration partners who will be working with multiple Brivo Access customers, we strongly recommend you use our standard OAuth 2 authentication. This will allow you to generate authentication bearer tokens without ever actually having to store or pass admin credentials for a Brivo customer. This makes it the most secure method for both Brivo and yourself and alleviates many security concerns that you would have to take otherwise. All of our authentication information can be found in the overview of our API docs. I'm going to start with headers really quick. While our token endpoints up here in authentication use an authorized endpoint to start our OAuth 2 flow and a token endpoint to exchange for bearer tokens, our token endpoints do not require an API key, merely a client ID and secret. However, once your bearer token has been received from our token endpoints, all calls to our API to actually make changes on the account will require the bearer token, as well as a dedicated API key for the account. Further information on our OAuth 2 flow can be found here in OAuth 2 token section. It is a standard flow beginning with a GET call to our authorized endpoint and then exchanging the access code to our token endpoint via a post call at the end of the flow. If you are not familiar with this flow, all of the information can be found in our documentation. Having said that, I will give it back to John to go over some of the features that you can utilize in a Brivo account once authorized.
Perfect. Thank you, Julian. This is our event tracker. So this is the heart of the system. So the way this is set up, the way the system is set up, what we're looking at here today is an account. The account has sites and the sites have access points or doors. So as you can see here, this is an account that we're looking at with about 15 sites all over the world, and each of those sites have doors. This is the heart of the system, which is the event tracker. That's exactly what it sounds like. It's tracking all events that have come through the system. So whether it's a valid access event, someone had a valid credential to get through that door, that access point at that time, or if it's what we call an exception event, which is anything but a valid event. Somebody has a door forced open, or they have an invalid credential, or they're trying to get in at 6 o'clock when they're really only allowed to get in at 5 o'clock. That's what's all relayed here in the event tracker. And that is reflected in the API and our event subscription. So you can go and pull these events out into your application. And Julian, I'll turn it over to you to talk about what that looks like in the API.
Thank you so much, John. If we come down in our API documentation to our events, we have two methods of actually getting events. As John referred to, we have an event subscription. This is, for those familiar, a webhook. The way that we work is we have an event subscription endpoint where you can post the criteria that you are looking for in your webhook. These criteria can stack, but they stack as AND operators. So you can see that our criteria types are for a site, for a specific user object, for a specific access point, which in this case would be a door, or this last criteria, which is an audit event. Audit events are a little bit different. John can go back and show this in a minute. But what you were looking at before was our event tracker, which shows you all of the events that are happening at the doors on the physical site. There are also audit or journal events, which are events made by administrators who are making changes to the programming on the actual Brivo account. All of these events are tracked in our database, and they are all available to pull through the API. Now, I say pull, but of course, with a webhook, you're not going to be pulling them. You are going to be defining a set of criteria that an event must meet. And when that event meets the criteria, we will post the event JSON payload to the webhook URL that you specify in this post call. So this is a standard JSON schema. You can see in our example, we have a webhook set up for site 1, the URL for the webhook where we will have Brivo post to, an error email in case for some reason we do not receive a 200 response back from the webhook listener, and then a set of criteria. So this is looking for specifically events that are generated at a specific site by a specific user. So when that user is actually making access events at this site and only this site on the account, we will post the event JSON payload to that webhook URL. And if you are interested in what that event will look like in JSON, we have a sample event JSON structure in our events documentation. Every event will come in with the object type of the event. So in this case, we have an access point event. The event was happening to a door. It will have a security action ID and a security action name. So the event in this case was an administrator pulsing the door from the UI to open it. You will also have an actor who actually triggered the event, the object the actor was acting on, the site. If the event was happening at a site, you'll get the site information as well as occurred timestamps inside the JSON payload. You can use this to pull any relevant data from the event that you want and then format it into a presentation for your end user embedded in your application. We also have a full events endpoint where you can actually manually pull the events rather than having us post them to you. The idea here would be that you look for a specific event inside a specific time with specific filters. We strongly recommend using our event subscription webhooks for 2 reasons. The first is that all API customers will be subscribing to an amount of API calls in a given 30-day window. Pulling calls to our events endpoints to pull events from us count as calls against that API subscription. However, when utilizing webhooks, the only call that actually consumes our API is the post call to define the webhook. All other subsequent posts that we make to your webhook do not consume that API subscription. The other reason that we would strongly recommend the event subscription webhooks rather than manually pulling events is because events will be sent to you as they are triggered by the webhook, rather than having to go search through a large list of events for a specific event. It's much more efficient, both from a call consumption standpoint and from an operational standpoint. And I will, at this point, give it back to you, John, to go over new features.
Perfect. Thank you, Julian. So we're going to talk now about users, groups, schedules, and credentials. So this is the user flow within Brivo Access. So I'll pick our colleague Angie here. Angie is a user within the system. First and last name is all that's required in the application to be a user. But in order to have access to any of the doors or sites on the account, again, if you recall back in the beginning of the video, we had the account, the sites, and the doors. In order for Angie to have access to any of that, she needs to be in at least one access group. She can be in up to 16, but she needs to be in at least one. So user, again, first and last name she's created. Optional to give her an email. You can upload a photo. We have up to 60 custom fields that can be added. All of this is in the API as well. And then again, as discussed before, she needs to be assigned to at least one group. That's how the logic works to give her access to the doors that are on the account. So you can see here, Out of all of the doors on this account across the world, by virtue of her being in the Berlin group, she has access only to these 4 doors at these particular times. And then you can go into configure a schedule. So you can do this here. You can create a schedule. You could go and set the times by day to, again, configure the time that Angie is allowed inside those doors down to the minute. Once the schedule is created, the schedule is assigned again to the group, and the user is put into the group. So that's how that works. And everything is unlimited on Brivo. So the number of groups that can be set up is unlimited. The amount of schedules that can be set up is unlimited. So you can create a group that could allow someone like Angie into every door across the entire account, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, all the way down to a group that allows her in, like one we're looking at here, just a few doors or 1 door, Monday 9 to 5, and anything in between. That's how the logic works. So once she's assigned a group and she has her access permissions, so she's in the Berlin group, she's only able to get into those doors at those times, we need to give her her credential in order for her to have a way to act on those access permissions. And the types of credentials here, we have a wide variety of credentials. We have hard fobs, or a card, an access control card. We have a mobile credential with a couple of different ways of using the mobile credential, of getting into the door with your phone. It can be done via a cloud connection, the application talking directly to the cloud, talking directly to the Brivo panel, or there's a local Bluetooth connection. Both of those can be used. A PIN code, a combination PIN, can be assigned to her, license plate, or facial credential as well. Those are the types of credentials that we have. So that's a summary in the Brivo Access application of users, groups, schedules, and credentials. And with that, Julian, I will turn it over to you to display how that can be used, those functions in the API, when you're ready.
Thanks so much, John. So, as the heart of any access event is going to be the user, we'll start there. Our user endpoint has the ability to both query existing users on the account, as well as create new users. I'm going to start with listing users. The list users endpoint can filter down by specific values, their specific Brivo ID, their first name, their last name, their status, custom field values, and that's about it. Alternatively, if you just query the entire list, you can get objects ranging from 1 to 100 per poll, with an option to offset the list. And the list will contain user objects in a data array. The first most important field to pay attention to is the ID field. This is the globally unique ID of that user object inside of our database, and what will be used to make any kind of changes to that user object through the API. You'll also get, of course, their first name, their last name, their created timestamp, and their timestamp for the last time the object was updated. You'll get their status, whether they're active or suspended, as a Boolean. This BLE two-factor exempt refers to a security check on mobile credentials. You'll get an array of their custom fields. However, you will not get the custom field values until you look at the user individually. The actual array is not populated in the global user list. What is populated are their emails and phone numbers. So if you need to do a user sync, you can pull the entire user list and then parse the relevant emails to see if that matches something in your system. If the user does not exist on the Brivo account, they can be created via post call to the same endpoint. When you post, you'll have this more or less the same fields to populate. The only 2 required fields for a user are their first name and last name. There is an optional field that I want to bring everyone's attention to as a developer, this external ID field. This field is only available and visible through the API, and it is there specifically so that you can associate a globally unique ID from your database with a user object in our database. This field will enforce uniqueness. You cannot have 2 user objects on the same account with the same external ID value. This helps you make sure that your sync is accurate, because we do in fact have a means at our user endpoint to retrieve a specific user by external ID. So if for some reason you lose track of a user and need to know if they exist in your database or in the Brivo account, you can query your globally unique ID against our user endpoint to pull up a user. It's very, very strongly recommended that you leverage this field when making your post calls to create a user or doing put calls to update an existing user that you found that you want to sync to your integration. You will also see that while we have those credentials that John showed in the UI, and a pin is showed as in the UI as an extra step after creating the user, when creating a user through the API, you can actually assign them a pin right through the post call. And while assigning that pin, you can also set an effective time and date that the pin will start working, and an effective time and date after which the pin will stop working. This is very, very useful for visitor management or temporary access. You will also have the ability to set in an array your emails and phone numbers. Emails and phone numbers are strings, and they require two values. The first is the value of the actual email or address or phone number. And then the second, for our purposes, is a type. We have the ability to add multiple emails and multiple phone numbers, and we make it so that you can designate which one you're looking at by the type. There's types such as home, work, mobile, and other. All emails and phone numbers added in this array will need a type. If a type is not specified, it's considered invalid. You will get a 400 response back. Finally, while we're talking about users, we can talk about adding a user to a group. This is actually done at the user endpoint to be most efficient. And it is here, this update users group memberships. What this will be is defining the user ID here in the path. And then in the body of your post call, you're going to set an array, and it's going to be added groups or removed groups. So this post call can either add a user into an array of groups or remove a user from an array of groups. And John mentioned that we are unlimited in the number of groups that you can add. There is a caveat here that we are unlimited in the amount of users and groups that you can add to our cloud database. However, our panels can only support keeping a user in up to 16 groups. You cannot have a user in more than 16 groups at a time. So when adding or removing from this array, you need to make sure that the array is no larger than 16 objects. Now you'll notice in the array, we're not adding the groups by name, we're adding them by their IDs. So let's move over to our group endpoint to make that a bit more clear. Went too far. There, group. We'll start here with looking at this put call to assign permissions to groups. Before we look at that, we'll look at our group listing, which is much like the user endpoint, just a get call to the base endpoint URL. This will, much like the user endpoint, return a list of all group objects on the account, ranging from 1 to 100 on the page size. If a page size is not declared in the path, it defaults to a page size of 20. I strongly recommend for all get calls leveraging the page size and setting it to 100 to get the maximum amount of objects returned per call. With each group presented in the data array, you'll get the ID of the group and the name of the group. If you then want to get more information about the group, you can query that specific group by its ID. This will get you a little bit more information about the group. Along with its name, you'll get whether it is using anti-passback and whether it has certain permissions that you can leverage. Gives some special permissions, such as this keypad unlock, which allows them to override a door's status by a special code, as well as whether, if anti-passback is used on the account, if members of this group are immune to the anti-passback enforcement. You can also find what doors the group has access to by extending the path to the access points. This will show you every door that members of this group get access to, as well as the scheduled access that they have. So in this case, we have an access point ID of the revolving door, and the schedule is a 24/7 access. So anyone that's in this group ID gets 24/7 access to this door. If you want to add a permission to a group, that would be a put call to the group ID along with your access point ID. So this would be the GUID for the door in the path. And then the body is the schedule ID that you are applying to the group for this door. So keep in mind that when you're applying permissions to a group, each door that you add to the group is its own call against the API, consumes each call. Many of our developers choose to have users set the group access themselves in the GUI and then just leverage the groups by adding the users to them. But you are able to actually create groups, default groups for your integration through the API. Now, to add those permissions, you are going to need a schedule. There are a few default schedules on the account which can be utilized, like the 24/7 access schedule. But if you need to make your own schedule, as John was showing in the UI, you can come to our schedule endpoint, and with a post call, you can create a schedule. I'm going to ignore the optional fields here, the site ID, the enabling group ID, the grace period. These are for kind of extra features that you can leverage against a group to allow for some pretty cool features for basically on-site administrators. If you're looking for more information for that, please reach out to us at api@brivo.com. But the required fields are going to be a name as well as a schedule block array. A schedule is not considered valid unless it has at least one block. So while you don't need necessarily a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday schedule all filled out, if all of these values are blank in the array, it will return a 400. However, so long as one of these is set with a start and an end time, the schedule is considered valid, and it will create a schedule and return it with the schedule ID. So this is the request, and the response back will basically be the same information along with the schedule's ID in our database, which you can use then to apply that schedule to a group permission. Finally, let's talk about our credentials. Once a user has been created, assigned to a group with permissions, they still need a credential to be recognized at the door to actually leverage all of this programming. We have a few different credential types. We already went over pins, which are created when creating the user. But we also have a variety of supported formats for physical credentials, which can be created by a post call to our credentials endpoint. Credentials can be created in one of two ways. These are listed as optional, but you have to choose at least one, either the encoded credential method or the field values method. So the two required fields are a credential format, which can be found here, as well as a reference ID. The reference ID is what the credential is the string that the credential will display with inside the UI for the reference of those who would be looking at it. If you know the actual encoded hexadecimal value of your credential, you can actually just specify its format and then send the hex value to us using the encoded credential key, as you can see here. If you do not know the actual encoded hexadecimal value, you can have us perform the actual logic to take the field values of the credential and encode it if it's one of our supported formats. So in this case, we're looking at a 26-bit credential. It has a card number of 329. It has a facility code of 70. that would actually translate to this encoded credential value. But if we didn't have this, we could just send these field values and have Brivo take care of the actual encoding of the object. If you specify both the encoded credential as well as the field values, the encoded credential will override the field values. Once the credential has been created, you'll get a return of the information, 26-bit card, card number, card facility code, as well as the credential's ID. You can use this to then come back to the user and assign a credential to the user object with the credential object. When performing this put call, you can also, just like with the pin, set an effective timestamp for when the credential will start working and when the credential will stop working. A success response of 200 without content will let you know that you have actually assigned the credential to the user. One thing that I do actually want to bring to everyone's attention here is that you'll notice that with most of our timestamps, we set it in UTC with the schema that can be seen in our overview. We also have the ability to change away from UTC by setting an offset on your time zone instead of using Zulu time. However, you'll notice if we go back to schedule blocks for a second. Went too far. When creating those schedules, we do not follow that same UTC time schema. We just do hour and minute. The reason for that is that these schedules are universal. They can be applied to doors, control panels, and sites all across the world. So 9 a.m. in Massachusetts is different than 9 a.m. in California, is different than 9 a.m. in Hong Kong. As such, we just set the time here in the schedule, and the actual time zone conversion is handled by the hardware controller at the site. That handles physical credentials, but we do have some other credentials that we can assign and create. If we go back to the credential endpoint, we have a create Eagle Eye Networks license plate credential. If you want to leverage license plates, there's a separate endpoint here. You're going to use the user ID that you want to assign the license plate to in your post call. The body will be the reference ID. That is going to be the actual license plate itself. Again, you set an effective from time and an effective to time. Then Brivo will do the conversion to Eagle Eye's hash and allow you to have a credential that Eagle Eye can recognize for a license plate that will be recognized in the Brivo system. If the user has a photo, you can also use this create and assign faceprint credential along with the user ID. What this will do is take the user's existing photo in our database and allow it to become a faceprint credential. Because it's a biometric credential, the user's consent is required. So this doesn't automatically turn it into a faceprint. What it does is send an email to your user to allow them to consent to turning their actual biometrics into a credential in the Brivo system. So this post call will require an email address to send the consent form to, and the language that that consent email should be sent in. Once that's initiated, your customer will receive an email from Brivo asking them to consent to faceprint recognition. If they consent, their photos are then used for biometrics for our biometric door station face reader. The final credential type, and perhaps the one that is most leveraged through the API, is our digital credentials. This allows a user to use their phone as an actual credential inside the Brivo system. This one is not actually initiated at the credential endpoint. This one is initiated here in our digital invitations. So, oops, that's the cancel. Create digital invitations. This is a post call to our user's endpoint with the user ID that you want to create the credential for. It will have just one field required in its request body, and that will be the reference ID. The reference ID is basically an email address. You have two options here with the digital credential. If you do not want to embed the digital credential into your own integration, you just merely want to leverage our solution, which is Brivo Mobile Pass, you can use this field string, send invitation email, it's a Boolean, and set it to true. If it's set to true, we'll just send our standard Brivo Mobile Pass activation email to the reference ID that you specify. By default, if you do not declare this, this is set to false. The reason being is that the actual return will be a reference ID as well as an access code. So our digital invitations are basically another OAuth 2, but instead of authorizing you as an administrator, they're now authorizing you as a user. So with this reference ID and access code, you can then return to our token endpoint with your correct client credentials and exchange it for your initial digital invitation token. This can be used at our pass endpoint to generate digital invitation or digital passes for your credential, which can then be used to unlock an access point. You'll notice that this access point only declares the door that you want to unlock. The reason being is that because the bearer token that you associate with this call is not going to be your admin bearer token, it's going to be your pass token, which will then determine if that pass token actually has the permissions to unlock this door. This flow can be completed through our API, and we have usage documents that go through this in detail. If you need more information, you can reach out to us at api@brivo.com. Having said that, while you can utilize this this method through the API, there are some caveats when doing so. The first caveat is that these will consume calls against your API subscription. If you go over your API subscription, these calls will be blocked and you will not be able to unlock the door with this method over subscription. The second caveat is that this method only works through an online communication between the digital credential device, such as a phone, our cloud servers, and our cloud server's connection to the door. If any of those lose their connection, there is no direct connection between the device leveraging the digital credential and the actual reader at the door. We do have an SDK solution which allows you to take this same digital invitation and embed it into an application directly on the phone. When doing this, you do not consume calls against the API subscription, and you gain the ability to leverage our BLE functionality with phone devices. So instead of the device talking to our cloud and our cloud talking to the actual door reader, now the phone is exchanging the digital credential directly with the reader. So long as the digital credential is valid, even if the phone cannot make connection with our server, and even if the panel is also offline with our server, so long as the panel was programmed prior to, the phone will communicate directly with the reader, exchange the digital invitation, and still unlock the door. So you can see that while we offer both API method and SDK method for our digital credentials, there is many benefits to using the SDK. And with that, I'll hand it back to John.
Great. Thank you, Julian. That is all we have for today. Thank you so much for watching and for your interest in working with Brivo, working with us. We look forward to working with you.